Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much to be here today. My name is Baumgartner. I'm working as a correspondent in Tokyo for Swiss Television and Radio France, French Public Radio. We have two great guests with us today. Let me introduce first our first guest, Mr. Billy Fung Jing-en, and our second guest, who has come to the press club several times already, it's Mr. Wang Dan. And let me introduce our session today by saying that in Hong Kong, a student-led umbrella revolution is alive and well, thank God. It erupted 2 years ago. Demonstrators took to the streets to call for the right to vote for their so-called chief executive in accordance with the limited democracy guaranteed to the former British colony when it was handed back to China in 1997. The occupation of parts of Hong Kong lasted about 3 months, and as you know, Beijing refused to compromise. But today, thanks to China's moves to punish the city, support for independence has entered mainstream politics. 6 candidates who openly support self-determination were elected recently to the Hong Kong Legislative Council. They succeeded to be elected despite a pre-poll crackdown by Beijing. Today we have 2 great guests with us, courageous people who favor greater autonomy for Hong Kong or who are fighting for the formation of a local autonomy without necessarily advocating full independence from the mainland. One of our guests, let's start with the youngest one, is Billy Fung Jing-en. He's 22. He's the former president of the Hong Kong University Students' Union. He faced a court case, a trial on charges of intimidating the chairman of the Hong Kong University's governing council. That man is seen as pro-Beijing. In a few days, he will appear in court. He doesn't know what will happen to him, if he will have to spend time in jail or not. Our second guest is Mr. Wang Dan. He used to have the age of Mr. Fung, I suppose, more or less, when he was a leader of the students' movement on Tiananmen Square in 1989. He is a little bit older today, but his mental age is like mine, I suppose, about 22 years old also. He has been jailed twice on charges of plotting to overthrow the Chinese Communist Party and the government. Then he moved to the US and later to Taiwan, where he is teaching contemporary Chinese history. Let me quote the Financial Times. If Beijing is able to alienate its own citizens in a former colony that only returned to the motherland 2 decades ago, what hope does it have of exercising so-called soft power beyond its borders? Please reserve a very warm welcome to our 2 guests. So I suppose we start with yourself. You will make a short presentation. It's okay, or we start with you?
Okay.
How do we start? First?
Yeah.
Okay.
I start because I'm short. I have a short.
Mr. Wang Dan first.
Okay, thank you for introduction. I'm very glad to see some of you were already friends. I just first I want to make a small announcement that since I already teach in Taiwan for 7 or 6 years, I'm planning to moving back to the United States next year, and I will establish my own think tank in Washington, D.C. Why I make this announcement? Because that think tank focus on China issues, including Hong Kong issues. So because I'm going to start this think tank, I become to feel interested and about what's the development, what's the political situation in Hong Kong. When I see the situation in Hong Kong, one question I feel very interesting and confused, because that is after the failure of Umbrella Revolution, everybody knows the number of Hong Kong people supporting independence is increasing, especially among the young generation. They think that the failure of Umbrella Revolution has proved that one nation, two system policy won't work, which I think is true. They also think the people in Hong Kong will never get true democracy and true self-government under China's control, which I think need to be discussed. That's the only way, they think, the only way out is to make Hong Kong an independent place. I actually totally understand and respect these people and this idea, but I still want to remind that this is a whole independent thing, needs more careful thinking. I have my reason here. First, people who support Hong Kong's independence affirm that Chinese government will never give Hong Kong true democracy and true self-government. But at the same time, they also believe that if they fight harder, the Chinese government have to allow Hong Kong to be independent. I really don't understand the logic here, actually. Maybe they will explain as the following, that Hong Kong people have to get Chinese government's permission if they want to have true democracy and the self-government under the one nation, two system policy. And they don't get the permission at all, as we know. So they will never get their true democracy and self-government. But the independent thing is different. It doesn't need a permission. I mean, Hong Kong independent supporters think it doesn't need a permission. Hong Kong people have their own right to decide their fate, so they don't need Chinese government's permission. So for them, fighting for Hong Kong's independence is much more practical than fighting for the democracy and the true self-government under the one nation, two system policy. But in my opinion, or my question is, it is way too much. I think it's just wishful thinking, because Chinese government, as I know, CCP, they doesn't accept the concept like nation self-determination. It's true that people's right of nation self-determination are expressed, stated in the United Nations, in international conventions of civil rights and political rights, and our government signed it. But the problem is that Chinese government doesn't accept it at all. How can you count on a government who never apply its own constitution and its fundamental law to apply an international law like this? So I think people can take Hong Kong's independence as an ideal goal to pursue, but they shouldn't think that fighting for Hong Kong's independence is much more practical than fighting for true democracy. That's my point. Maybe disagree with Ms. Fung. So on the contrary, I think it's so obvious that Hong Kong's independence is a much more difficult thing to achieve, and I have reason here. Let's suppose because I think independence need to come as the result of a referendum, right? So for referendum to take place, a law on referendum needs to be passed. For a law on referendum to be passed, legislators who call for such a law must form majority in the legislative council. That's the logic. However, under the current system in Hong Kong, only half of the seat in the legislative council are elected through direct election. That means even if the absolute majority of the voters, Hong Kong peoples, they vote for candidates who support a law on referendum and all these candidates become elected, they would still not be able to form a real majority. So as a result, a law on referendums would never be passed. Therefore, for legislators who call for a law on referendums to form a majority in the Legislative Council, a political reform is a must. And so are the true universal elections and the true democracy, not independence. A law on referendums can be passed only when true universal elections and true democracy become reality. Independence can be achieved through a referendum only after the law on referendum is passed. This is why the independence of Hong Kong must include a successful political reform, the universal elections, and a true democracy. Let's suppose that if we have an architect, if an architect sees this, you can listen. He sees that under the current circumstance, it's impossible to construct the ground floor. Therefore, our only choice is to construct the second floor. People would find this ridiculous and very illogical, right? But this is exactly what many Hong Kong independent people think, I think. They think true universal elections and true democracy are nowhere achieved. So therefore, the only remaining option is independence. I think, isn't this equally ridiculous and equally illogical? Throughout the years, the pan-democrats of Hong Kong, we call it Fanmin, keep their movement for the democracy and the true self-government up and running. The way I see it, their approach, I think, is completely correct. It's illogical for many independent supporters to simply just deny the pan-democrats approach. At this stage, independent supporters and the pan-democrats in Hong Kong, I think they need joint forces. They need to get together, send their priority on true democracy first, and the true self-government first, and then maybe independence in the later stage. On the other hand, we should all understand that as long as mainland China remains under the Communist Party's dictatorship, it is barely possible for Hong Kong to achieve the democracy and the self-government. And independence is all but impossible. So this is why everyone needs to be concerned about political reform in China, in mainland China, and furthermore, be concerned about the civil rights movement and the democratic movement in mainland China. And that's why I personally don't understand and disagree with those people who think Hong Kong's democratic movement and China's democracy are totally two different things. No, I don't agree with this. Maybe Mr. Fung can give us more explanation, so I leave the time for him. Thank you very much.
So Mr. Fung, please, you can start.
Okay. Testing. So, good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I must express my highest gratitude to the FCCJ for providing me such a rare opportunity to share my personal experience and my vision to Hong Kong future here today. I guess you all must be very familiarized with Professor Wang Dan, who is a very knowledgeable gentleman, and at the same time he witnessed and stood on the front line in the movement which pursued democracy and changes of China in 1989. So let me introduce myself first. I'm Fung Jing-en Billy, a Year 4 student studying Bachelor of Arts in the University of Hong Kong, majoring in Chinese language and literature and minoring in Hong Kong study and politics respectively. I was elected as a president of the Hong Kong University Students' Union Section 2015, representing 15,000 undergraduate students in the University of Hong Kong. I was the court member and the council member, which are the governance structure or governance council of the University of Hong Kong in the 2015 and 2016. I devote myself into safeguarding the university autonomy and freedom in my terms of office. So you can see that this is my cabinet when I was the president in the Hong Kong University Students' Unions. Our cabinet names is Ascent, which means reaching the highest excellence and making a better Hong Kong and a better Hong Kong University. We are the very first students' union advocating the idea of localism and being elected in 2015, right after the Umbrella Revolution. The topic today is the tension between Hong Kong and China and the recent democracy movement in the semi-autonomous territory, which means Hong Kong. Throughout this sharing, I would like to figure out the formation of Hong Kong identity from the colonial Hong Kong to the Hong Kong nowadays. Also, I would like to illustrate the democratic development of Hong Kong and its conflicts with China. And lastly, I would suggest my advocacy in solving aforementioned difficulties and conflicts in the second point. So let's talk about the identity conflicts between Hong Kong and China. To discuss this point, we have to know more about the formation of Hong Kong identity first. In the colonial Hong Kong people, to be exact, the bourgeoisie, which means the upper classes in the Hong Kong, who were facing the struggle and conflicts in identity. At that time, the complicated Hong Kong identity consists of three elements. They are the colonialism, the Chinese nationalism, and the local identity. The most typical case of such struggle is the founder of the Hong Kong College of Medicine in 1887, and which later on in 1911 became the Faculty of Medicine in the University of Hong Kong, Mr. Ho Kai. Ho Kai was born in China, but he served for the colonial government, holding 11 political positions and assisting the work done with the colonial government in Hong Kong during the colonial period. However, at the same time, Ho Kai was so proud of Hong Kong's political and legal system, and as well as the economic achievement. According to the Professor John Carroll, who is the history professor in the University of Hong Kong, he said he realized that Ho Kai considered himself more privileged and different from the Chinese who were living in the northern part of Shenzhen River, which means the mainland China today, and at the same time, Ho Kai also considered himself was more privileged than those general public in Hong Kong at that time. So he consists his colonial identity. He also consists his local identity. However, at the same time, he's very concerned about the development of China as well. He wrote books on China's reformation based on Hong Kong's experience, and he seek for emergency aid from Hong Kong colonial government to the Chinese government after the flooding occurred in the mainland China at that time. We can see the complexity and Ho Kai's sense. We can see the complexity of the Hong Kong identity and Ho Kai's sense of identity in the colonial period. In fact, after the handover of Hong Kong to the China, the aforementioned factors, to a large extent, are still applicable to the formation of Hong Kong identity, which are the colonialism, the local identity, and the Chinese nationalism. In the bygone state, due to the ambiguity and seemingly contradiction of Hong Kong identity, Hong Kong people rarely mentioned Hong Kong identity and not even tried to identify our identity, but worshipping the economic success in the 1960s, 1980s, and 1990s, and to nowadays. So where is the watershed? The watershed is the largest scale local democratic movement in Hong Kong so far after the handover, which is the Umbrella Revolution. When it comes to the discussion of democracy, it is inevitable coming to the discussion about our identity in the sense of civic society. As the former president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln's saying, "The government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." So we then ask the question that who are the people that government is accountable for? Who are the people making the collective decision designing their leader? The concept of people is actually referring to the citizen within a particular region with border, and the people in that particular region shall have their own common values and identity, and therefore they come together and make the decision collectively for their home country, for the best interest of their home country. In pursuit of democracy, we realize that Hong Kong people are is a concept which is different, which is a different community than the people living in the mainland China in the sense of the right and responsibility to our home city. These identical struggle and conflicts between Hong Kong people and China people are not uncommon to us. The most typical case occurred in 2015. The football match between Hong Kong and China stirred up a controversy as the China's football team irritate Hong Kong people by releasing a poster on the left-hand side, which means we are Hong Kong people so weak, so we need to seek for foreign assistance. So Hong Kong football team consists of many different races. This move irritated Hong Kong people. Several slogans like "Hong Kong is not China," which originate from the independent campaign of Catalonia, which is "Catalonia is not Spain," appears in the football court. Many Hong Kong people were buying tickets in order to support Hong Kong's football team, but not the China one. Again, back to the topic today, the identity conflicts between Hong Kong and China is more and more serious in Hong Kong. Of course, there are a myriad of examples illustrating the tension between Hong Kong and China. And one of the most vivid examples is the democratic development or the democratic development history in Hong Kong. In the 1984s, the Hong Kong University Students' Union, with the consent of HAUSU Council, which this is our council, monitoring the executive branch of the Hong Kong University students, sent a letter to the Premier of People Republic of China and expressed our stance in general election in Legislative Council as well as the chief executive after handover. The premier at that time, Zhao Ziyang, replied the Hong Kong University Students' Union in 1984 and confirming that the advocacy suggested by my predecessors, the democratic governance, the Zhao Ziyang confirmed the democratic governance in Hong Kong is undoubtable. 民主治港是理所当然的. He replied the Hong Kong University Students' Union in 1984. In the 1990s, the Basic Law was released without Hong Kongers' consent in order to replace the Royal Instruction and Hong Kong Letters patent and place the constitutional role in Hong Kong after handover. In the Article 45 of Basic Law, it emphasized the selection of the chief executive by universal suffrage, appoint the nomination by a broadly representative nominating committee in accordance with the democratic procedures. This move was to maintain the confidence of Hong Kong people and most importantly, the foreign investors' confidence in Hong Kong. However, in the 2004, the PRC government denied the genuine election of Legco and chief executive in Hong Kong with her power to interpret the Basic Law. In 2014, the PRC government again denied Hong Kong democratic development with the document released on the 31st of August 2014, namely 31st August Framework, 83日框架. The PRC government repeatedly violated her promise in Hong Kong democratic development. Our predecessors spending more than 30 years in pursuit of democracy, but sadly in vain. So it is little wonder that Hong Kong federations of students that take a leadership role in the Umbrella Revolution released a declaration in 2014 showing the conviction in seeking democracy with the title 抗殖反篩選自主港人路. In English, this is anti-colonialism and non-genuine election. Hong Kong people should determine our way. This is a topic of this declaration released by the Hong Kong Federation of Students. You may wonder why did they release such a declaration after the handover in 2014. According to the David Shenbaum, he defined the new imperialism should include economic takeover, military control, and political influence. In the economic aspects, Hong Kong's industry migrated to the mainland since 1980s, and it moved to the inner mainland after the 2003 with the CIPA agreement, which led to the uniformity of Hong Kong industry, and led to the situation that Hong Kong need to heavily rely on the import from the mainland China, and we heavily rely on the tertiary production like traveling or financial services. More and more China's capital takes over the important industry in Hong Kong, like media, like press, South China Morning Post, something like that, and also the land developing company, and also supermarkets in Hong Kong. In the military aspects, it's with no doubt that the People Liberation Army are staying in Hong Kong at the moment. In respect of the political influence, the PRC government control the political agenda in Hong Kong under the framework of PRC Constitution, Article 36, and Basic Law. In fact, the PRC government is like governing Hong Kong like an empire, as if the British Empire were ruling us in the bygone day during the colonial period. So after spending 30 years negotiating and compromising with PRC without any positive returns, what is our way out? To me, it is a time for Hong Kong independence. Hong Kong should be a sovereign state with collective effort by Hong Kong people. We should not again wander around in the framework suggested by the PRC government, but to search for a new path. We could foresee the challenges and difficulty ahead, but relatively to Hong Kong's freedom and democratic development, this is the only, or maybe this is the most possible ways to me. And in response to Professor Wang Dan, I have several points to discuss with you that you have mentioned. It is very difficult for Hong Kong being an independent state or a sovereign state because of the great influence of the mainland China. However, I would say, what is stability? Stability is doing the same thing repeatedly and looking for different results. Our predecessor was striking for the democratic development in Hong Kong, and the PRC government made her promise for the Hong Kong democracy development. However, she violates the promise. So what's the point for us to negotiate and compromise with a country without integrity and loyalty? To me, we are facing several problems in pursuit of Hong Kong independence. First and foremost, it is the international support is of paramount importance to the Hong Kong independence campaign. After the Second World War, the framework or the role order had been designed after the Second World War generally. The existing country would not maybe have no incentive to support any other independence campaigns to change the role order at the moment. However, without the international support and recognize, Hong Kong could never be a independent sovereign state. So the attitude of the international countries, to me, is of paramount importance. The international pursuing work should be done by the representative of those who advocate Hong Kong independence, like Edward Leung Tin Kee, my classmate in the University of Hong Kong. Secondly, we have to face the resources problem in Hong Kong, like our water supplied by the mainland China. But it is not. But this problem could be solved by referencing the example in Singapore. The Singapore dilute the seawater into the water which can drink by the people, by the human being. And at the same time they maintain a good relations with Malaysia so that they could sustain a stable import of food or other resources from the countries nearby. Thirdly, the military problem could be an obstacle to the Hong Kong independence campaign. We have no military base in Hong Kong other than People Liberation Army. We don't even have an army in Hong Kong safeguarding our border. If we became a sovereign state. But one point to be noted is that we are having 6,100 million reserve, which could buy and import the military equipment from the foreign countries in order to safeguard our homeland. Also, we can combine with Japan, with Taiwan, with Philippines in order to strengthen our military cooperation if we became a country later on to safeguard our border and our safety. Although we are facing several problems in pursuit of Hong Kong independence, but relatively comparing to our predecessors spending 30 years on Hong Kong democratic development, trying to negotiate and compromise with a country without integrity. This is to us, to the young people, it's really a more appealing and possible way to us. So this is my opinion, and that's all my sharing, so let's discuss later on. Thank you very much.
Mr. Wang Dan, do you want to respond to?
Well, I am surprised to hear why Mr. Fung want to choose the Hong Kong independence, because they think in the past everything they done is nothing, so they have to find a different way. But I think different way cannot be the important reason to claim independence. You have to find more reasons for independence. You cannot just, because we want something different, so we go independence. I don't see the logic here. The second point, I think, well, international support is very important for the Hong Kong if you really want independent, but I really doubt the international community really, they will support the independence. So maybe you can you can discuss with me. I don't know how can you persuade the other countries to support independence of Hong Kong and cut down their relationship with mainland China. That's my second question. The third I want to follow is, you mentioned the case of Singapore and Malaysia, but I think Malaysia is not China, not mentioned to CCP. That's two different cases. Well, I don't think it's good to compare these two cases. And the fourth, I repeat, I support and I respect the willingness of independence. I think it's totally right. But what my point is, it must be practical. It must be practical. You cannot just lip work. You found something, and I think those people, I mean, pan-democratic forces, what they did, I think, practical. And I don't think independent movement, at least for now, is practical. That's important. That doesn't mean I do not support the idea of independence. And last, I think if you really want independence, you have to do it step by step. And the first step, I think, is a referendum. Try to fight for a referendum, because all the independence come from referendum. So that's my response.
Thank you very much. We open the floor to anyone who wants to ask a question. Who wants to start? A question? You have a question? Please. Don't be shy.
Siegfried Nittel, writing for Austrian newspaper, Der Standard. I am surprised by your arguing for independence of Hong Kong, because if I think about when Taiwan talked about independence, the People's Republic of China made some kind of military training in the area with some rockets, and they threatened every time they threatened to solve it by military forces to suppress the independence movement, and so does it to. And you talk about a kind of alliance, or military alliance with Japan and Taiwan. Does it not mean war in East Asia? Is this such a kind of alliance with Japan and Taiwan?
Mr. Fung.
The reason why I suggest such a military alliance is that we are close enough in order we can support each other, and at the same time to cooperate with the United States returning to Asia policy. I think we can we can form the alliance together in order to cooperate with United States fighting against the China factor, especially the military factors. So the reason why I suggest the alliance with Japan and Taiwan and Philippines at the moment. Of course, Philippines is still subject to change because her position swing between the United States and China recently. But to me, we still have space to cooperate. Yes.
Another question? Yes.
My name is Clark, Australian freelance. This is a meeting about Hong Kong, and so if my question is not appropriate, please tell me. But we do have here the presence of Dr. Wang Dan, who is famous because of his leadership of the following the Tiananmen incidents. And my question would be about Tiananmen. Is that acceptable or not?
Fine.
It is, all right.
Sorry.
Of course, we're all impressed by your bravery and what you've done subsequently, but in all the discussion of Tiananmen, I am always surprised that nobody talks about what happened before the soldiers began shooting, right? We all know that they didn't shoot. There was no Tiananmen massacre, but there was a lot of shooting outside the Tiananmen Square, and a lot of people were killed. But before that, the crowds, the anti-Beijing crowds, and I happen to know something about it because I was in China at the time. 我也讲国语.
Okay, great.
So I know China quite well. And there was intense dislike and hatred of the regime amongst, or not the students, amongst the crowds. And the crowds had gathered around the Tiananmen Square, and when the soldiers came, and then, I must say the regime waited a whole month, which is surprisingly generous. When finally the soldiers came, the crowds were ready to attack, and many, many soldiers were killed. The buses we have the photos of the burning buses. There are photos of soldiers which have been badly incinerated. And I know for a fact, from a Reuters source and from the Australian Embassy, that burned bodies of soldiers were hung up under the bridges. Now, if you do that to the soldiers of any regime, obviously the soldiers are going to go crazy. Why is this very important fact overlooked? We never see the photos. Well, I've seen some of the photos, but they're usually suppressed. But, I mean, it is necessary to put the whole Tiananmen incident into perspective, is it not? That's my question.
Okay, thank you. Good question. First, I really don't think many students were killed. Many soldiers were killed. So we don't have any weapons, and their military force. If we can kill a lot of soldiers, where we are Shaolin, we're Superman. No, I don't think we can kill so many soldiers. There are only several soldiers were killed. But as I know, at least I know one of the case. One soldier was killed because he shot at an old woman and the grandson of that woman. That enraged a lot of people. This is one thing. And the second thing is, I think it's very important to tell who do the violent things first. I think it's the government. They shoot us first, then we fight back. I think it's very natural, it's our right. Every people has this right. If you want to kill me, I have every right to fight back. And during that process, maybe somebody killed. But responsibility should not put on the shoulder of us, but should on the government, I think.
So you don't think many soldiers were killed before moving to Tiananmen and attack the students?
Well, no, there's no such source. I don't know. Where did you get the information and sources that many soldiers were killed? I never heard of that. Even government didn't announce this. I heard the first press conference after the Tiananmen massacre. The spokesman of China, they said only 200 something, some soldiers were killed or injured. It's not many, and of course I think they lied, not so many. I don't believe that many soldiers can be killed because we don't have anything in our hand. And we cannot just use our hand to kill a lot of soldiers.
Please.
Well, there were some killed by hand. There's at least 3 or 4 accounts of that. when some of the soldiers entered Tiananmen Square in front of the Australian Embassy, Wiedener, the AP photographer, who took that famous photograph of Tank Man. Incidentally, Tank Man was taken the day after Tiananmen when the tanks were going away. On the previous day, he had witnessed soldiers being killed by hand. But and we're not talking about students, we're talking about the crowds, the people. You know, I mixed with the people. I've been to China. The hatred. I'm not trying to praise Peking. It was the terrible hatred amongst the people. And the killing was not done by, most of it was done by, we have the photographs of all the burning buses. The buses were attacked by Molotov, by petrol bombs. Peking gives a figure of 148 vehicles. I'm interested, I hadn't seen the figure of 200 soldiers killed. But even if it's only 200 soldiers, in fact, that's quite a lot. Do you know what happened when 4 American contractors were burned to death in Fallujah and their bodies were hung up? The American military went wild. So I'm surprised to I'm totally in sympathy with the students and what you did, and you were very brave. But there is this other side of the story, is there not? But anyway, as I say, it wasn't done by hand, it was done by burning, mostly. We've seen the photos of all the buses burned.
Okay.
How did that happen?
Yeah, I still have same answers for you. If there are some soldiers were killed, there must be some reasons. You could say some crowd they go crazy or they hatred, but if a government use the military force to try to crack down a student movement, they try to kill students first. If the government do this, I think it's very natural and reasonable to hatred.
And is it true that the crowd outside Tiananmen Square was very hated the soldiers, was very angry at, as he says? What was the feelings of the people outside Tiananmen Square?
Well, if we back to the history, after May 19, when government started to send the troop, they go to the Tiananmen Square, they blocked by the people. The atmosphere at that time is very friendly, I mean, between crowd and the soldiers. So why change it? Just because the government never hear about the request from the people, from the crowd. They still insist on the martial law. So I still think the responsibility is on the government. And if that is true, which some soldiers were killed, but more people were killed, much more than the soldiers. So I understand that you feel confused about why soldiers were killed, but I still want to suggest you to ask the Chinese government why they kill more.
Mr. Fung, when you hear about what happened in Tiananmen, don't you worry that the same situation could happen in Hong Kong?
Firstly, I would like to respond to in supporting what Professor Wang Dan have said just now. And I want to add one point that the main point is not killing people or army or not, is that move is legitimate or not. The student with bare hand facing the military arms at that time. So you are asking them not to save themselves? No, that is not a practical way. In fact, the neutrality of army or public servant only applies to a democratic government. But not the autocratic government. In fact, the army themselves at that time is part of the autocratic government. So I can't see any immoral reason for the student or the general public to safeguard themselves with bare hand or by all means necessary. Secondly, for a correction, at least I want to take Professor Wang Dan as an vivid example. He was there. He was participating in democratic movement in China, with bare hand, together with his classmates, also with bare hand. But the Beijing armies, or the army sent by the PRC, also killed a lot of students at that time. So peaceful behavior doesn't necessarily lead to a humane treatment by the government and army. So I think what we are going to do is that we try to voice out our opinions and try to study in the possibility of Hong Kong independence and work it out. Of course, we are having we are mentally ready. I don't know whether I'm physically ready, mentally ready to pay the price or pay the cost for the independence campaign of Hong Kong.
Who wants to ask the next question? Yes? Can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mr. Wang Dan and Mr. Fung. My name is Tur Mohammed, and I am the representative of World Uyghur Congress in Japan and East Asia. I want to ask you one question. The Uyghurs also seeking independence from China. Do you have any idea to make cooperation with us and the Tibetans, please? Thank you.
This is from you.
不是太明白，不是太听到他在
哦，
讲。
他说他们新疆维吾尔族人也寻求独立，你们是不是愿意跟他们合作？维吾尔族人，新疆。他问你愿不愿意跟他们合作？
In face of the suppression of the Communist Party of PRC government, of course we could communicate and even have a cooperation in order to support each other in the independence campaign. So I think it's possible. However, I'm just a student in the school and try to voice out my opinions at the moment. So maybe to me it is to myself it is not in my. I mean, I'm not able to help much, but to me, I think it's possible for us to cooperate.
Next question. Wants to ask a question? Okay, I will maybe try to lead to another question regarding the Uyghur, the Xinjiang and Tibet, and they are home of separatist movements that go back decades, if not centuries. But the rise of one independent movement in Hong Kong, in a territory that is ethnically, if not linguistically, the same as most of the rest of China, should be, it's my question to both of you, a wake-up call to Beijing. What do you think, Mr. Wang Dan?
Wake-up call for Beijing?
The fact that in Hong Kong, which is ethnically, if not linguistically, the same as the rest of China, the fact that people are asking today for independence should create some concern in Hong Kong and force Hong Kong to face such a situation. What do you think?
You mean Chinese government's attitude?
Yeah.
Attitude to the independent?
Yeah.
Well, of course, CCP will feel very headache about the situation in Hong Kong now. They already have a problem from Taiwan, the Taiwan independence. If the tendency of independence of Hong Kong still keep on going, they will get more trouble. So I really think it's very dangerous for those young generation, but they are really brave. They still pursue this goal, but it's still dangerous for them because Hong Kong is not like Taiwan. Maybe China have nothing to do with Taiwan, but they can do a lot. In Hong Kong, they can they just kill you or put you in jail. They try to murder a chief editor of a magazine several years ago. So they can do a lot of mafia things. So I think it's very dangerous. They will have a harder policy to deal with the independence of Hong Kong than independence of Taiwan.
Testing. To me, I think such campaign will not be the wake-up call for the mainland China government, because there in Hong Kong there is a system, namely one-way permit. 100%, 150 people coming from mainland per day, every day, to Hong Kong, and we have been hand over to the mainland China for nearly 20 years. Nearly 1 million of mainland people migrate to Hong Kong through the one-way permits. So in fact, I genuinely believe that Hong Kong could eventually reach the genuine democracy, given that the election result is controllable by the mainland China government. So, and such system still ongoing yesterday, today, and will be ongoing tomorrow. So I don't think under such, the PRC government is at a very privileged position in relative to the Hong Kong issue. She have much influence, or she has much influential power in Hong Kong. So I don't think the mainland China or the PRC government would so-called wake up by the independence campaign.
But if Hong Kong people ask more and more for independence, do you think it might encourage people in Shanghai and in Beijing to do the same thing, to ask also for?
I'm not quite familiar with the. I don't know if there are any independence campaign in Shanghai or Beijing.
I can answer that question.
but of course I know the Shanghai people or Beijing people also think that they are much more privileged, right, than other Chinese in as a whole. So I'm not quite sure if there are any independence campaign in such aforementioned region. Yes.
Or to maybe they might ask in Beijing, in Shanghai, for more political freedom. What do you think? And it would help Hong Kong people too. Or Hong Kong people could help Shanghai and Beijing people.
To me, the PRC government is a centralized power, so I don't think she will allow her province or cities to have more autonomy in such sense. As for the second question, that if there were more Hong Kong people seeking for Hong Kong independence, whether the Beijing government would granting more autonomy to Hong Kong, I don't think so, because the Communist Party never give attention or never give attention to the public opinions, even though they are the majority.
Mr. Wang Dan.
Mr. Baumgartner, I really don't think you don't need to worry about if Hong Kong got independence, that Beijing or Shanghai people want independence. I don't believe any Beijing people want independence, because they don't want. If they want to go to Hainan or Hubei, they have to get a passport. It's too troublesome. I don't think the people of Beijing, Shanghai, they really want independence. But I also think I see it as negative things, because if the tendency of independence, both in Taiwan or Hong Kong, keep on rising, I worry about that will encourage the nationalism in mainland China. Use young generation, they're already very nationalistic. If they already know what happened in Taiwan, but now if they know there's another independent movement that happened even in Hong Kong, they will be very angry. Of course, I don't agree with them, but that's a danger.
But they don't want to have more political freedom, Chinese people?
Well, I think for many Chinese young generation, national interest more important than democratic value.
Yes?
was it not every time the fear of the central government in Beijing? If one part of China, perhaps Taiwan or Hong Kong wants independence, other part will follow, Tibet or Xinjiang, and this. I think this kind of the fear of the breakup of China as a one country. I think it's not a great fear of the Chinese government. So this way I think they can't accept from this reason any kind of independence movement in any part of the country.
你没听？他就说北京就是如果真的都各自独立的国家的力量会大幅下降，那北京不可能接受这种事情。
To me, the PRC government will not grant democracy to Hong Kong in short run. I mean, in a short period of time, and will not, of course, allow the Hong Kong independence campaign. But we have to back to the original question: that why do we need her permits if we are strong enough? If we gain the international support, if we have the military alliance with our friends all over the globe. So, as a human being, as a human being, determining our own way is our human right as a Hong Kong people. And secondly, and which is not necessarily need the consent of the PRC government to me. Yes.
But his question was that the big fear of Beijing government is that the Uyghur movement, Tibet, might be encouraged to try to separate themselves from China mainland. That's his question. And if if there is an increase in the movement for independence of Hong Kong, it will encourage also Uyghur and Tibet people to try to reach independence, and that's maybe the biggest fear of the Beijing government. I think that's his question.
Defeat, yeah. Right?
What do you think about it?
Well, I answer these questions. I think if you look back in the history, every region power will face this kind of a problem. Everyone, of course, including Beijing. I don't think the most important thing for Beijing is accept independence or not. The most important thing is the way they treat this request. You use the way of negotiation or you use the way of military force. I think that's important things. So I just hope or wish Chinese government can use civilized way to treat this request.
I have another question regarding Tiananmen and Chinese. What is the difference between, in your opinion, Chinese students today in China compared to your time? Don't you think that what happened to Tiananmen with a lot of can be repeated in China in the future?
Can happen again?
Yeah.
Well, I believe it will happen again. So in every society, I think that the first troop to promote social progress will be young students. China will not accept. But two generations, of course, very different. Our generation is kind of idealist. We think it's our responsibility for this country. But the younger generation, maybe they just give up the responsibility. They concern more about themselves. But I still think the young generation interested to change the society, because the change is good thing for them. For example, the problem of internet. We don't have this problem. Our generation, when I was young, I don't have this problem. We don't have any internet. But for this post-90 generation, they can not survive without the internet. But On the other hand, our government, they really concerned about how to control the internet. So it's very natural they will fight each other on the subject of internet control.
But you also said young Chinese people today are quite nationalist.
They are nationalists, but they concern more about their own interest. And if they can freely use internet, I think it's more important than the national interest. So they have an order of value, their own interest, national interest, and the democratic value.
Who wants to ask a question? You want to ask a question? No? Okay.
I appreciate the honesty of your remarks about the young Chinese being very nationalistic and self-centered. I'm talking to Mr. Wang Dan. I'm talking to Mr. Wang Dan. But I'd like to ask Mr. Fung. I've been in Hong Kong since the 1960s. That's a long time, over 70 years. In those days, of course, English. Everybody spoke English. Since then, the use of English has declined. What impresses me very much about Hong Kong, and you should be making this point, is the strength of Cantonese nationalism, right? I can see that as opposed to Mandarin. And you have your films and everything, your TV programs, everything in Cantonese. And if you're going to have an independence movement, that Cantonese nationalism will have to be the basis of it. My question, though, is to what extent is there you also have to speak Mandarin, right? It's taught in the schools in Hong Kong. To what extent is there a conflict between Cantonese and Mandarin? And I assume that if there is a conflict, this is helping your cause, right, of independence. But how do you cope with this problem of having to speak Mandarin? Are there some people who don't want to speak it, or can you survive without speaking Mandarin?
Firstly, I think I can answer in Mandarin first, and I repeat it again in English. 我相信我会说普通话，那又如何？过去我们学习普通话是因为它是另外一种语言，我们觉得可以一起学习，就像好像我们学习英文一样。可是到了后来，现在的教育制度就是说，广东话是一种方言，北京话或者是普通话才是一种语言，然后我们的学习中文的时候就要使用普通话，而不是我们一直提倡的所谓母语教育，就是用广东话来教学。然后我们可以看见，就是说有越来越多在广州啦，在越来越多的普通话播放时间是强制的普通话播放时间，电视节目上面。然后在文字上面，我当然会写简体字，我会看简体字，可正体字才是香港使用的文字啊，才是这个地方才使用的文字，而我们现在被强迫学习简体字普通话。我生育一个不会强迫我学习普通话和简体字的时代。我93年出生，然后那个时候香港的教育制度还是保留英国殖民地遗风啦，还是比较自由啦，还是保持当时的风格。我不需要强迫我去学习，我自己也会简体字，我自己也会普通话。为什么现在要强迫学生去学习普通话，强迫学生去学习繁体字呢？我觉得这个说不过去。一来，我们过去一直的教育方针都是以母语教学为主，这个第一。第二，我们学习正体字才是中文的最正宗的文字啊。简体字是中共设计 中共设计出来的文字啊，而它是违反了就是中文字6书的造字原则啊。那我们为什么有好的不学，要学一个坏的呢？或者是学一个人为 artificially amend simplify the Chinese？ 所以我就有点，我们不是拒绝学习，我们现在被强迫学习。重点在于强迫，不是不愿意。对，就是这个问题。So, thanks for your question. And you have just asked me what's the difference between Cantonese and Mandarin, and what's the conflicts between Cantonese and Mandarin. We can take the example in Canton. The official broadcasting time of the television have to be Mandarin for several hours, and fewer and fewer television program will be broadcast in Cantonese, and therefore it irritates the Canton people to protest and want to safeguard their own language, Cantonese. And in the case of Hong Kong, our secondary school or even primary school or kindergarten are forcing our students learning Mandarin, but not Cantonese. They try to use Mandarin as a medium of learning Cantonese, learning Chinese language. However, the principle of Hong Kong education is that we are using our mother language, which is Cantonese, to teach our subjects in Hong Kong secondary and primary school. I am the fifth case that I was not forced to learn simplified Chinese and Mandarin, but I can still handle both. So the main point is not about whether Cantonese more privileged and vice versa. It's just about the mandatory education system or mandatory learning in Mandarin and simplified Chinese in Hong Kong. This is the main problem. Yes.
Thank you. Is there any other question? If there is no other question, I will end the session, but if you have one last question, please.
Mr. Fung, you talked about perhaps an alliance with the United States. But I think in the United States, do you think is the United States a reliable partner for it? If you think about in the conflict in the last years, perhaps in the South China Sea, with when China wants to bring a kind of make search for oil. The American army couldn't help the Vietnam government, or when there was a small number of Vietnam trawlers and a coastal guard ship came to the drilling vessel, but they couldn't help. There were much more Chinese. So, in this way, do you think, and now look at the new government, you don't know what will happen with the American government after the election. Do you think you can trust the United States in this case to help?
And what about Japan?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah.
The US and Japan.
I think it's inevitable for us, if we are seeking for the Hong Kong independence, to swing apart from the China factor, and another strong power in the world is United States of America. So we have inevitably swing towards the United States of America. So this is what I thought at the very first time. And of course, I know the Chinese factories are very influential all over the globe. So we then have to ask the question that, why do we very important to our alliance? Possible alliance, I mean. Why do we what's the importance for us to our possible alliance? Hong Kong has long been being a base of revolution, changing China, and bring the ends of the Qing dynasty. Hong Kong nowadays, can it be a breaking point? Because our region is on the same continent with the mainland China. So can we be a base to weaken the influence of China for the United States of America, something like that, or something other superpower want to weaken the influence or weaken the power of China. So I think we have to. So this is my very first thoughts at this moment. So I think we still have to study whether. So I would seek for a postgraduate program after the graduation from the University of Hong Kong, in order to get to know more about such factors. But this is the yes. So this is what I think at the moment. Yes.
I have something.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I don't think the United States will really support the independence of Hong Kong,
yes.
But it's obvious they become more and more concerned the Hong Kong situation. That's true. We already know U.S. government has the policy, especially by Hillary Clinton, that back to the Asia. So I think U.S. can do everything. If everything can make trouble for the Chinese government, they will support it. So I think they still will use some way to support this tendency, but not just independence.
Thank you very much. If there is no other question, I will end this session here, and I want to thank Mr. Fung and Mr. Wang Dan to have come to the club, and I offer you, both of you,
I already have a member.
another 1 year membership to the
Another
club,
1 year.
and to Mr. Fung too. You have 1 year to both of you to come back to the club, and again we want to thank you very much for using our facilities to express yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.